Welcome aboard. This is Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read 2 books this week.
God, I watched a movie. This week we are covering Netflix's Moxie. Directed by Amy Poehler. It came out March 3rd. It's about Vivian, a 16-year-old fed up with the sexism at her high school who starts a secret magazine, the titular Moxie, to promote a feminist agenda and all-out culture war at her high school. It's pretty fun. I'm really excited to open this up, but we want to preface this with we are men.
Who are dumb.
we do not know what we're talking about. That's kind of the point of the show, is we want to do better, so we're digging into this today. So just to preface, if you've read all of Tina Fey's books, maybe this will be a retread for some of you, but if you like Tina Fey but you don't know,
and Amy Poehler
and women in comedy, then perhaps we have something to offer you. Just bear with us. If this is what your life is about, please let us know how angry you are. Please get in contact with us anyway.
Or hopefully we'll find, because we're going to talk, like you said, there's her inspiration for this Moxie. It comes from this punk rock feminist subgenre movement in the 90s. So if you know nothing about that, we knew absolutely nothing about any of this. So we're going to hopefully piece some things together and show you how history goes from one thing to the next, because this is also being spoken very loosely as an answer to Mean Girls, which Evan mentioned. Tina Fey was her movie many moons ago. And how is this an answer to that movie by her dear friend, Amy Poehler?
What a web we weave. I can't wait to go on this ride.
Of course, like all illiterate adventures, starts with a book, the 2017 novel by Jennifer Mathieu. She is a lovely lady. Watched a bunch of interviews with her. This is now her 16th year as a high school English teacher. And she's also an author, covertly, because she uses her married name as her teacher alias. So some of her kids don't even know what she does on the side. But this was her 4th of now 5 books out. And one of her books got the Children's Book Council Debut Award, and she was on the Amazon Editor's Best Young Adult Novels for 2014.
Wow.
So she's doing great work. Oh. And like Evan said, we're woefully ignorant about a lot of things, so I cannot begin to get into the depths of the different waves of feminism. But she said, as far as what she recommends as a book to read, is called Girls to the Front by Sarah Marcus, which is specifically about this Riot Grrrl movement in the 90s in punk rock, where the main character gets her influence because her mom was a part of that movement. She said that a lot of the bad experiences that happen in the book, she said either they happen to me or a friend or something I have observed in a high school setting as a teacher.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of maybe some of the criticism of the movie is like, oh, people wouldn't do that. And it's like, well,
they do.
They do. This is high school.
I find that so often is the unbelievable is actually, it's that simple. Mm-hmm. I can see where parts of this could feel outlandish, but absolutely happened. Mm-hmm. It straddles that line.
And of course, because this is coming from the book, there are a lot of differences. But Evan alerted me before we got into this. He had kind of positioned this episode as a comparison between Mean Girls, which I saw long ago. But it does ring so true once you see the plot of the thing. And what do you think?
It was much more similar than even I expected. I kind of said that on an offshoot of Amy Poehler is directing. We got girls in high school, this group. But when it comes down to this magazine, this anonymous magazine she publishes, well, that's also kind of the linchpin at the end of Mean Girls, where the anonymous hate book is revealed to the entire school. So it's very, very interesting that these two things share something so tightly wound as far as an anonymous feminist, magazine. Now, the difference is between the conversation here of how long we've come in nearly 20 years, whereas is Mean Girls, the conversation there is we can't be mean to each other because that gives everybody else an excuse to do whatever. So in 20 years, where Moxie is now more of we actually need to band together and say something when our voice, say something when we see something, right? Use our voice for something as a collective, because we're stronger together than just you or me or somebody else, individual.
So the author of the book, Jennifer Mathieu, references heavily Riot Grrrl, which was this punk rock feminist subgenre of music in the 90s. And so we'll do our best to dive straight down to the deep end. This is also where the slogan "Girl Power" comes from, was derived from the pages of these Riot Grrrl zines, self-published, collaged magazines, which I didn't know that at all.
No.
Now that's like a massively commercial,
Right.
Thing, but it came from this as most things do come from
I didn't
something
realize it was
small.
that late in the, the late 80s, early 90s. Like,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
almost feels like, I don't know, you could have said, 1940, 1940s, women go to the workforce or something, I would have been like, right. Like,
No, yeah, it's super recent.
gosh.
So as far as punk rock is concerned as a whole, it just started becoming more toxic towards women. And these fan magazines had grown in the British scene of music since the 70s as kind of a part of perpetuating the punk culture, is this DIY, stick it to the establishment. And
Right.
also some context for the Moxie movie, where it's taking place in present day. This would be the only way that you could distribute even not just the set list or the lyrics or anything, but like what the movement was as a whole. Even as far as 1976, there was a punk magazine called Sniffing Glue, was probably the most popular one. But they explicitly said in one issue of that magazine, punks are not girls.
Hmm.
So it's already an exclusionary thing. So the formation of this Riot Grrrl movement, and when we say Riot Grrrl, it's girl with 3 R's in the middle. But the formation of it started in the Seattle, Olympia, Washington area right at the start of the 90s. These two gals, Toby Vale and Kathleen Hanna, had formed their own punk magazine and band called Bikini Kill, and their music is
Cool.
used in the film.
Hell yeah.
So they formed in October of 1990. There was another band called Bratmobile in Oregon, which was formed by Jen Smith, and she was the first one to use the phrase Riot Grrrl in a letter
Mm.
to one of her bandmates, Allison Wolf. And then this other guy, Allison Wolf, partnered with the band in Seattle, Bikini Kill, to create this new magazine, which then is the Riot Grrrl with 3 R's. And the girl part came from being empowered as girls, kids, before society takes over your conceptions of what it is to be a woman. Liberate that word, which is why they also use the triple R, because it's kind of changing the derogatory use of the term.
There is a fantastic documentary about Kathleen Hanna. It came out in 2013. It's called The Punk Singer. I've seen it. It's pretty fantastic if you're really into this and want to know more about that political movement, the music scene through the 90s, revolving around Bikini Kill and Riot Grrrl. Punk Singer, look no further.
Yeah, I'll definitely post a link to that in our show notes. Everything we talk about will be there. But a lot of the zines and things that they were going to led to not just punk rock music shows, but group meetings discussing pertinent topics as it relates to girls/women. They were bringing up problems that they saw: domestic violence, homophobia, and were notably female in a outstanding way, in the best sense of the word, because they wore their hair in ponytails, performed in makeup and dresses. Kathleen Hanna, as you mentioned, sung in a Valley Girl accent in parts. They were very trying to say, hey, we're girls in this movement. It's not something that is exclusionary.
Yeah.
And Kathleen Hanna would even
can't tell us we can't.
Sing punk music. Yeah. That's what punk is about, like,
exactly. Like you can't tell me what to do.
Yeah. She would even call girls to the front of the stage, because they were girls in these mosh pits were often attacked and pushed to the back. I saw footage where she's like, no, let them come up to the front. Like, this is not something that you can just
a sudden urge to watch a movie I've not seen, but I've been meaning to watch forever. It's directed by Drew Barrymore. It's about girls doing like roller derby.
Yeah, yeah.
Suddenly I just like, I want to watch that now. That's ridiculous. That's a movie I've been like putting off watching for like a decade.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the vibes here. And also in terms of the magazine thing, like, I just didn't really even, it didn't hit me
I had
as
no
far as
concept
reading
of
the
that,
book,
no.
but this is really a precursor to the internet of sharing art, ideas, information in the shows, handing out free cassettes. It's not even in relation to the music. Like I said, it's not even about getting publicity for your band. It's about all these other things, these topics that are
what's going on in your scene and what we're about and what we're here to do,
especially as it relates to women. Like I said, domestic violence, sexual assault, like things that are not being talked about.
Yeah.
And information that's the only way that it can be distributed to these people. So it also impacted and then expanded to the mainstream. There's a band, Slater Kinney, which formed at the end of the movement and became massive in the indie rock scene. And you could even say acts like Fiona Apple or Alanis Morissette discussing
Mm.
female empowerment came from this. But the movement as a whole, at least in the public consciousness, the very generic public consciousness, was sort of made to look ridiculous, or they misprinted the magazines out of context, did not address the fact that they were trying to address these more pertinent political topics, or doing things like putting 3 R's in girl or writing slut in lipstick on your stomach intentionally to reclaim the phrase or make a
Mhm.
message. It's just like, oh,
Right.
look at these weird people. And then the same thing, the Spice Girls sort of co-opted that girl power term and maybe turned it into, I mean, it did a lot of good, but it also morphed into this Frankenstein consumerist thing where it's like Barbie has girl power, but it's like maybe you don't want to be like Barbie.
It's almost strange how quickly they, like, grabbed it. They seized it.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause I'm like, "Wow, this just happened in the '90s, and when did," like, "Oh,
Spice
wait."
Girls, yeah, in the 90s, yeah. And then lastly, in terms of the connection to another burgeoning music scene, I didn't know anything about Kathleen Hanna or any of this, so this was fascinating to me. Kurt Cobain dated Toby Vale, who was one of the members of Bikini Kill in
Mhm.
1990, and introduced Hanna to Dave Grohl, and then they started dating. These are the
Wow.
folks from Nirvana. So they're doing their own thing, but these are two bands that have two couples in
Wow.
each band's in 1990. And Kathleen Hanna wrote the phrase "Kurt smells like Teen Spirit" on his wall one day because he was using Toby Vale's deodorant, the girl deodorant Teen Spirit. And Kurt Cobain said he didn't know that and thought it was some anarchist punk rock sentiment.
He thought it was like, "I do," you know?
Yeah, and
You
then
know, she's like, "No, the scent, the
yeah.
literal scent."
So she was the one who came up with that most iconic. I mean, now that's like
Wow.
a song of a generation, you know.
I love that it's also misunderstood from the inception.
Right. It's a joke. But this is
She's like,
from
"No, no,
her.
it is that's what it's called, Kurt."
Mhm. Yeah. So that kind of segues me at least into Amy Poehler, because yet another person that I didn't know anything about, and not even necessarily. I just don't
It's like,
watch a lot of TV.
you
Yeah,
know who she is,
yeah.
but,
But I've never seen Parks and Rec.
right.
I
Neither
I
have
don't watch a
I.
lot of TV,
I haven't either. I've not seen Parts and Rec.
but she is beloved by so many. So I thought, let me dive in and see how she ties into comedy, writing, and then Mean Girls, all that stuff. She was raised in a Boston suburb. Her parents were teachers, which I thought was interesting,
Oh, really?
um, because her energy is very much helping other people along, positive, uplifting,
Warm.
warm. Yeah, warm, exactly. She moved to Chicago in the 90s to study improv. This is where she met Tina Fey. They were both taking classes in 93 at Improv Olympic, or IO,
Gosh,
if you're in the scene. Theater
magic.
class is where they met. Then they joined Second City, touring together. And Amy Poehler settles in New York and co-founds in New York City Upright Citizens Brigade, which is the other big thing,
The other
improv
player enters
theater.
the ring.
Yeah. And in 1996, that became a series on Comedy Central, and they had various specials and whatnot. Tina Fey, on the other hand, joins SNL, and she became obsessed with getting Amy Poehler in on that game. Tina Fey had been a writer there
Oh,
since.
really? I didn't know that it was her that got her over there.
Mhm. Well, yeah,
Interesting.
she had been a writer there since 97, and then in 2001, Amy Poehler joined the cast. They're the first women to host Weekend Update together. And then in 2004, Tina Fey casts her in a smaller budget comedy at the time called Mean Girls, which I was surprised to find out. This is also based on a book called Queen Bees and Wannabes.
Right, I know less about that, actually, yeah,
Yeah,
but
this is the second book that I read this
this is
week.
why I wanted to do this, because I knew Mean Girls was a book. This is a book. Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, ooh,
Mhm.
ooh, the parallels.
The
It'll be
parallels.
bountiful. It'll be teeming.
Yeah. So the book is by Rosalind Wiseman. It's a nonfiction. I think I couldn't get through all of it because it's so much information. And it's
Oh,
basically
yeah.
like if you're going to raise a daughter or have anything to do with having a child who is a girl in your life, like please read this and learn about psychology and
Mm,
social dynamics and empathy and everything
yeah.
as it relates to all different sorts of scenarios And now there's an updated version as it relates to social media and technology, because
Oh,
that's a whole
good.
other can of
Wow,
worms.
okay.
But it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. And this is where the phrase "mean girls" comes from, is from this book where she's talking about what that means, and the different types and the cliques, and all of that stuff comes from
Yeah.
there. So Tina Fey read this, said, "Hey, the concepts from here, but the whole story is hers and original." And she's the one who wrote the movie as well. And like you said, in terms of the similarities, like they both feature an outsider trying to free the student body from the A-listers.
The misogyny.
Yeah. Mean Girls is more about deconstructing girl on girl aggression, and
Right.
Moxie
This is not a
is about
Mean Girls is not
inclusion.
about reactions to feminism. It's not about the culture war that we're having today. It's an internal discussion about girl to girl, how do we treat each other?
Mhm.
Whereas I think Moxie is about what do we do with that?
Yeah. It's also interesting that even Amy Poehler is playing the mom in both.
Yeah. I've almost totally
Like
forgot.
different versions of the cool mom. You know what I mean? Like that's the joke in Mean Girls, and then it's the
That's actually beautiful because you're exactly right. Because as she is portrayed in Mean Girls, like, like throwing condoms everywhere, and like you just like way over involved and like
Mhm.
edging these girls on to like really like behavior. Just leave it at that. Whereas this one, like at the time, that was the funny idea of a cool mom. And now the idea of a cool mom is like one that listens to you.
Yeah.
One that like her whole arc is like, no, I want you to be yourself. That's the whole point. You don't get it. Like, I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be you.
Mhm.
And it's like, wait, that's a cool mom.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, how far have we come in 20 years? Like
Right.
that. And Amy Poehler,
Is
she's
both.
both of them.
Yeah. Fascinating. When the Mean Girls was starting to be developed, obviously Tina Fey wanted her in, but Paramount was wary of casting her because they'd been burned, I guess, from their perspective on some other quote SNL
Mm,
films, and they didn't want it to feel like it was that sort of movie,
right.
according to the director. But they got her in, and a thing that shocks a lot of people is that Amy Poehler and Rachel McAdams, the daughter, they're only 7 years apart in age.
Right.
So that was also a consideration, is like, can she even play this part? But then she does it beautifully.
It's
Um,
amazing.
so Amy Poehler then leaves Saturday Night Live in 2008 and does Parks and Rec in 2009. Tina Fey consequently went to go do her show 30 Rock in 2006. So that's another
Yeah, they
fascinating kind of.
both do move on to like I always viewed Parks and Rec as the answer to The Office. It seemed like, by that point,
Mhm.
Amy Poehler, Steve Carell, well, there you go. There's your one for one replacement. She's a big star. We get these characters to surround them in this workplace. There, that's almost
Yeah,
why I didn't watch it, because I was like, it's basically the same
but
premise.
it's very different.
Like when
Yeah.
it comes down to just the mechanics of it, and I was like, well, I've done the workplace. I've done the workplace comedy. I just did it, like, so I think that's the only reason I didn't hop on board.
Yeah. But from what my brother and sister-in-law tell me, it is a completely different, she is not female Michael Scott.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a completely different character. And as Amy Poehler, like you said, warm, she has feminist ideals. She's lifting people up. It is a
Mm.
completely different character and story and tone and everything. And then lastly, in terms of the connection between them, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, they've hosted the Golden Globes 4 times, including this year, from across the
Doing
coast.
doing research for this, that was the brunt of what you have to get past, was all of their award
Right.
show moments.
Yeah.
I'm like looking for like tasty nibs of like their relationship and where they came from, and those kinds of things, and it is just like all their award show monologues
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just
And they did a couple other movies together, but I think just a quote from Amy Poehler's biography from 2014. She said, "We met each other when we were poor and single." And she said, "Now we're both rich as shit and have husbands all over the world." But they don't want to necessarily do a thing where they're both in charge together, because they realize like that's the element of their friendship that would be compromised. Like they know to sort of intersect in a weaving web
Mm.
through their professional and friend interactions,
that takes huge maturity.
but they're not going to do a show together. They said, like, that just can't happen. So all of this stuff talking about those two ladies led me to realize my lack of knowledge in what they are coming from. Like we talk
Right.
about the punk movement, but
Who is
in
their predecessor, you
right,
know?
female comedy, which first that like terminology, I watched a documentary which I'll post a link to called Women in Comedy, which was a documentary on PBS. And at the end, the one gal being interviewed is like, this is the last documentary where you're allowed to say it's just comedy. I think it was Joan Rivers, who's like, there's no comedy and then women in comedy. It's like, it's just comedy. We don't need to say, like, there's no different, like,
Right.
so that's all I'll say about that. But that's a great resource as far as all this stuff. But you had said you had seen something like way, way back, which reminded you of something that we had talked about.
I was looking for, I was like, did Lucille Ball ever step into like directing? Is there a predecessor? What's this idea of like women in comedy, stand up, improv, and then expanding in their medium? But in the middle of pulling on that, I found a character that reminded me of people that we've just been talking about in episodes recent past. This reminded me a lot of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, a bit of Billie Holiday, but I ran across who is credited as the first female stand-up comedian is Jackie Moms Mabley.
Mm-hmm.
So she was back in the 50s. She was doing stand-up. She was a gay, black, and politically minded figure, and at that time was just, it stands out. It speaks volumes to me that like, wow, she's really blazing a trail. If you've listened to the Billie Holiday episode from a couple weeks ago, or Ma Rainey from earlier this year, this character fits right in line with these strong black women in arts characters that we've been kind of picking apart and looking at. And her story is just as textured and as rich and
Mm-hmm.
as traumatic as all of those. So if you've not heard of Jackie Moms Mabley, I'd implore you, please go check her out. So I figured that was worth
Oh yeah.
worth bringing up.
No, that's super cool. That's a great start to it all. Because also the thing that I had seen is that there's, at least in this documentary, they were talking about women as it relates to comedy and sort of the the trouble being like men being uncomfortable with it.
Ugh.
So Phyllis Diller is the most known female comedian from the 50s, but her whole shtick, she was very self-depreciating. It was all based on how ugly she was. She's not ugly.
Mm.
Like there's pictures of her. She's chic and elegant off stage, but it's kind of like she can't be a challenge to the husbands in the audience, like, and that's sort of the game she had to play in her first at
That
being one of
is
the main.
That's fascinating because that really actually parallels Mom's Mabley. With her onstage persona was this old woman with like a frumpy house
Mhm.
dress and hat and toothless, and like she had to put on this crazy character that then allowed her to get just as wild as she wanted to be.
Yeah.
So it was a hugely smart decision. It's genius and it's exactly relating it back to Moxie. It's that the Vivian doesn't have the gumption and doesn't know what the right thing really is because she doesn't have an outlet. She's not able to stretch. She doesn't have those muscles because she has nowhere
Mhm.
to stretch those muscles. So she assumes this Moxie persona to where she can finally just yell out and scream her voice.
Yeah.
Finally, just somewhere to work her voice like a muscle.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, there's an audience there, and people reciprocate to it, and people feel involved with. People feel the exact same thing. So it's interesting that putting on these characters through these prisms are allowed to open up the honesty of it all. I think that's really fascinating. But
No, it
then
is, yeah.
coming back to these women in comedy, early comedy, and them having to like put that, it was the kind of the necessity of they had to create these onstage personas, these characters that then made it was easier to just get down and dirty.
Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with the show The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Right.
Oh, I
I haven't
I've
seen
only
it,
seen the
but
first
yes.
episode. My girlfriend absolutely loves it. My mom loves it. My dad sat, as dads do, sort of just standing behind the couch watching, but never
Right.
actually sitting down for the whole thing. But he's like, "Oh, this reminds me of Joan Rivers," and so I think it is definitely a love letter to her because
Mm.
she actually comes from Second City, the same place that Tina Fey and Amy Poehler did. In
Okay.
She debuted in 1961. She's more the traditional stand up in the clubs and whatnot, Joan Rivers. And she said once she got a note from Lenny Bruce saying, "You're right, they're wrong," Lenny Bruce. And she kept that
Mm.
forever because she is not
Wow.
putting on a charade of trying to pander. But it worked. She had a immensely successful stand-up career. She's the first woman to host her own late-night talk show on a major network.
Oh,
That was a
man.
late show starring
That's
Joan
cool.
Rivers.
That's exactly kinda what I was, like, trying to pull on. I was trying to find that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm glad I found mom.
Yeah. So, the next person that we go into as we move into the '60s is Carol Burnett, and all these names I've heard, but have no context for.
Right.
She had been in 7 decades of television. The
Oh my
the
gosh.
biggest being the Carol Burnett Show from '67 to '78, the first of its kind, a variety show hosted by a woman, more like Saturday Night Live, more like vaudeville with sketches and music and the whole
Right.
shebang, but it's her show. It's the Carol Burnett Show. She's also the first celebrity to appear on Sesame Street. She's in episode 1
Oh,
of Sesame
wow.
Street because that also debuted in the late '60s.
That's huge.
Mhm.
That's bigger than I think we're even, like I wanna stop and give that some credit because I think that must be, that's a milestone.
Yeah, yeah, so that was a huge, huge piece of work that she was involved in.
Wow.
Um,
I did not know that at
she
all.
was friends with Lucille Ball, and I can't even get into her all of her stuff because it's just insane how much she was involved in and did, but I just thought for my own whimsy to think about, like you said, the perspective. Her production company, Desilu, named after Desi Arnaz and her, Lucille, was the second largest independent television production company in the United States.
Oh my gosh.
And outside of her shows, I Love Lucy and whatnot, which was also the first to feature an ensemble cast, she was on the artistic side of her production company because she had starred in a bunch of B movies before and sort of knew what people wanted and how to
Oh,
make it
yeah.
happen. I didn't realize that their production company was responsible for Star Trek.
Whoa.
Gene
Really?
Roddenberry came to them and then it got bought by CBS or whatever.
Oh my
They were the
gosh.
production company that made it.
Lucille Ball.
Her production company. Yeah, she was the one who gave the go ahead on Star Trek and also Mission Impossible.
Oh, man. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Wow.
her
Well, that's huge. That's crazy.
yeah. But the big one from the '70s was the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Oh, yes. Okay,
Are
okay.
you familiar with that at all?
Just a bit, that's the we're getting warmer with the names and
Yeah,
the
into our time. From
my
'70
awareness.
to '77, notable for its portrayal of an independent working woman. She's the associate producer of a news program in Minneapolis, and it's challenging the role in marriage and family because she doesn't have a family, she doesn't have a husband. And
Mhm.
that show spurred 3 spin-off shows from the 3 supporting characters, each of them lasting 2 to 5 years. The show
Oh,
won
man, I didn't know
29
that.
Emmys. That record was not broken until 2002 when Frasier won 30.
Wow.
And of course, if you can see that she's an associate producer of a news program in Minneapolis, Tina Fey was heavily inspired by this for her
Mm.
show 30 Rock
Mhm.
as it relates to showing
That's
television production, you
makes
know.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was interesting. I don't know much about this at all, but later in life, Mary Tyler Moore she said she was recruited to join the feminist movement of the 1970s by Gloria Steinem, but did not agree with her views and said that women have an important role in raising children and did not believe that women owe it to themselves to have a career, which is just fascinating considering all that she did and how known her show was for presenting an independent feminist woman and tackling wage discrimination issues and all kinds of stuff.
That's fascinating.
So yeah, I don't know how that fits in, but I just thought that that was
Notable.
notable. Exactly. And then the last one to get to, which really is the capstone on Amy Poehler, Tina Fey, is Gilda Radner, who was in Second City in 1974, and she became the very first cast member that Lorne Michaels hired for the start of Saturday Night Live in 1975,
Oh,
the
wow.
now famous.
Oh my
And
god.
she had joined Second City in '73. She was also on the National Lampoon Radio Hour, which had Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, all that is
Gotcha.
going on. And she was notable for her iconic characters. Obviously, Saturday Night Live, the start of all that, and her show on Broadway. And I just saw from a book, which I'll post a link to, called "We Killed: The Rise of Women in American Comedy." They were just saying here, there's hardly a female sketch comic today who does not claim Radner as an inspiration for her comedy career.
Wow.
It's an interesting subject to go from the waves of movements.
Absolutely. How did we think of them as such a pillar of comedy for the last few decades they have been, but immediately asking ourselves like, well, who are their predecessors? Like, who could we relate them to? That's why doing this is really worthwhile. It's just like, okay, and tracing it back, what is the lineage here, going from one to the other?
It's good to know how punk rock fits into this movie Moxie, and how that's a reflection of Mean Girls, which is a reflection of comedy and movements as a whole.
Yeah, if you pair this, the women in comedy up through into Mean Girls, launched into this, paired with that,
90s, yeah.
it's hugely fun, and it's fun to watch. And what I enjoyed, and I think on other movies maybe that we've covered, and maybe like if I could lightly compare this to like Kissing Booth or something like that, is I think on one level that the direction of this really succeeded on Amy Poehler's part, was showing this main character's growth and journey, and it was subtle. It wasn't until after the fact that even down to the costuming, I really took in like, wow, she has gone through a whole journey just down into the costuming, and in a subtle way too, and in a way that I didn't realize they were trying to say anything in any particular scene until it was over, until I had the sum. And so you see her go from the awkward, not really sure, not doesn't have much of an identity, into she has a full on identity, and she's a whole person by the end of the film. So I think when it comes down to that, the arc here, and then Amy Poehler's direction, and I want to second this with the casting. I think this is the second where this really does succeed, where other films in this level might make some other
Right.
decisions. I think every one of these casting decisions was spot on, nailed on. What Amy Poehler is good at are characters. What Amy Poehler is good at is dialogue and chemistry, and she nails that out of the park through this whole thing. So. And you cannot say enough for a director's job. That is everything. If you mess up casting, you're an uphill battle all the way through. So I just wanted to maybe, because it's back and forth. This is a movie that's been successful. It's been in the Netflix top 10, but there's a lot of talk about it and a lot of criticism out there, and a lot of lumping it in with other movies that I would say maybe it is. I would like to put a stake for where it is good and where it succeeds.
Yeah. And is it the answer to Mean Girls? Maybe, maybe not.
That's the baton pass.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you got to have Mean Girls first. Was like, we can't have this infighting. We got to be united. Okay, we're united. Now what? That's what this movie does.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Taylor.
Yes.
Thank you for sticking with us.
A special request. Evan and I were talking about how we enjoy doing every episode, and we know that people pick and choose based on their interests, whether they like horror or whether they like what's just
come out. We
cover
cover a lot of things.
And we do that purposefully.
So we don't expect... Yeah,
because
we don't expect to have everybody listen to every episode. Not everybody's into everything.
But I predict that there is one person somewhere out there that does listen to every single episode, or has listened to every single episode and gone back and done so. And if you are that person, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at IlliteratePod on Instagram. We're just fascinated if you are that person. If you're not that person, obviously reach out to us. But this is a special request because if you have listened to every episode, you're listening to this one, and we want to know who you are, and maybe we'll send you a present or something.
Yeah, please get in touch with us. It would mean the world. But on to the next. We will see you guys next week. Thank you so much.
Later.
Later.